A widow sold because she couldn't conceive, but the rancher with the baby girl asked her to stay. West of Abilene, Texas Territory, spring 1876. The sky stretched wide and endless above the dusty main street of Cold Creek, a town too small for law but too stubborn to die. Wind stirred grit and silence between weather-worn buildings. Beneath the awning of Jeb Carter's feed and auction house, a crowd gathered, half curious, half cruel, drawn by the kind of spectacle only a frontier town could permit without shame. Clara stood on the wooden platform with wrists folded and jaws set tight, though her heart beat like a caged bird. Her dress, once the finest thing she owned, hung tired on her frame. Dust clung to the hem like memory. She was 25, a widow for 3 years, and for the last 8 months something worse. Unwanted. "She ain't got no childbearing use," barked Jeb Carter, the auctioneer, his voice rasping over the crowd like a whetstone. "But she can cook, clean, sew, and keep her mouth shut. Let's start at $10. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Some men chuckled, others elbowed one another. A few spat to the side, pretending disinterest while eyeing her like cattle. Clara's fingers dug into her palm, hard enough to draw blood if she held long enough. A mother near the front whispered to her boy, "Look away." But no one looked away. Not really. Not when humiliation came dressed like justice. Behind her calm face, Clara felt a storm. Her late husband's family had blamed her for the silence in the cradle, called her cursed, sold off her things, then sold her name. She had become less than a woman, less than a wife, and now less than a person. $8, someone shouted. $6, another countered, laughing. "Hell, I'll give 2 and a button if she don't talk." The crowd roared. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough to pretend she wasn't there. And then the voice came. "I'll pay 20. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the crowd like a rifle shot. Every head turned. A man stood near the edge of the boardwalk, one arm wrapped around a baby, the other resting on the worn strap of a leather satchel. His clothes were plain but clean, boots dusty but well kept. His presence quiet, but it held weight, like someone who did not speak unless he meant to be heard. Clara opened her eyes and found his. He didn't look away. Someone muttered, "That's Ethan Kerrigan, rancher out by Twin Ridge. His wife died last winter." The baby in his arms stirred, a girl not more than 6 months old, with tufts of dark hair and sleepy eyes. "What the hell does he want with a barren woman?" someone sneered. Ethan ignored it, stepped forward. "I said 20, in silver." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was confusion, suspicion. A good man didn't buy a woman, and if he did, he sure as hell didn't overpay. Jeb Carter cleared his throat. "Ah, 20 it is. Sold." Clara didn't move. Ethan walked up to the platform, shifting the baby to one arm. He looked up at Clara, and his voice lowered. Not for her alone, but for anyone who still dared to listen. "You ain't a thing to be bought, ma'am. But you looked like you needed a way out. And I've got a house that's missing more than just a cook." Clara stared at him. The baby blinked up at her with eyes that held no judgment. Then Ethan did something no one expected. He took off his hat. And he said gently, "Name's Ethan, this here's Kelly. We'd be honored if you came home with us." In that moment, the crowd faded. All Clara could see was a man who didn't see her as broken, a man who held a child like the world hadn't hardened him yet. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something other than shame. Maybe even hope. If stories like this stir something in your chest, go ahead and tap that hype button. It lets us know your heart's still out riding the range with us. The Kerrigan Ranch lay nestled between the waving grass of open plains and the jagged breath of distant mountains. Wind whispered through the mesquite and cottonwoods, and the low bellow of cattle echoed in the wide valley like ghosts calling home. The house stood modest but solid, whitewashed wood, a wraparound porch, and smoke curling from the chimney like a quiet promise. Clara sat stiff in the wagon seat as they rolled through the front gate, her hands folded in her lap, The worn fabric of her skirt twisted between nervous fingers. The house, the land, the man beside her, it all felt too big, too quiet, too uncertain. Ethan had said little during the ride, only pausing to check on Kelly, who now slept peacefully, wrapped against his chest. There was no chain on Clara's ankle, no threat in his voice, but still, she had been owned once before. She stepped down from the wagon slowly as Ethan unhitched the horses. He nodded toward the door. "It's warmer inside. I'll bring in your things." Clara didn't move. "What do you want me to do?" Ethan turned, his voice plain. "Help where you can, mostly with Kelly. That's all." She followed the creak of the porch boards, the groan of the screen door, into a home that smelled of firewood and leather, milk, and something sweet beneath it all. Maybe hope, if hope had a scent. The first room held a stone fireplace, 2 old chairs, a cradle tucked against the wall. The cradle's edge was worn from rocking, but lovingly carved. Clara's eyes lingered on it. "She won't sleep in it," Ethan said quietly behind her. "Keeps crying unless I hold her." He looked down. "I ain't much good with her yet." Clara said nothing. She walked over, looked down at the sleeping baby. Kelly's tiny chest rose and fell with impossible softness. Her lashes were long, her fingers curled like promises not yet spoken. Clara hesitated, then reached in and gently lifted the child. Kelly stirred. Clara froze. Then the baby looked up and smiled. Not gas, not confusion, a real, toothless, radiant smile that cracked something open inside Clara's chest. Her arms instinctively tightened, pulling Kelly closer. "She likes you," Ethan said, with something like wonder in his voice. "I don't know anything about babies," Clara whispered. "She don't know that." The moment passed in silence, warm and unsure. That night, Clara sat in the old rocking chair by the hearth, Kelly asleep in her arms. She'd meant to lay the baby down, but somehow she hadn't moved. Not for hours. From the corner of her eye, she watched Ethan in the small kitchen, struggling to prepare a bottle. He dropped the spoon, spilled the milk, cursed softly under his breath. It wasn't graceful, he wasn't sure, but he never stopped trying. Later, after the bottle warmed, he took Kelly from her arms and tried to rock her. Clara watched him hum tunelessly, bouncing awkwardly. Kelly fussed and wriggled. Ethan looked lost. "She likes when you whisper," Clara offered. Ethan smiled, exhausted. "That right?" He tried, and slowly, Kelly calmed. That night, Clara lay awake on the cot in the small guest room. Outside, the wind howled over the prairie like a wild thing. Inside, all was still. And she thought about the man with calloused hands who had offered her a home without asking for anything back. About the baby who smiled without judgment. About how, for the first time in years, her touch had mattered. She could leave tomorrow, no one would stop her, but in the stillness she realized she didn't want to go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She wasn't here out of need. She was here because of a baby's smile, and because something deep inside her whispered, "You still have worth. You still belong." The weeks slipped by like wind across the high grass, unnoticed until you looked up and saw how far the shadows had shifted. On the Kerrigan ranch, days began with the crow of a rooster and ended with the soft creak of a cradle. And in the quiet in between, something wordless began to grow. Ethan spent most mornings in the pasture, mending fences or riding the range. Clara learned to bake bread again, to boil milk without scalding it, and to soothe Kelly when she whimpered from nightmares only babies could see. Their rhythm wasn't rehearsed, it simply happened. One overcast afternoon, Ethan returned early and found Clara sewing by the hearth while Kelly napped. The scent of something warm and buttery filled the house. "She slept through the thunder," Clara said, not looking up. "I think she trusts the storm now." Ethan nodded slowly. "You got that effect, I reckon." He didn't elaborate. He rarely did. But as the storm rolled in heavier that night, Clara found herself wondering what storms he'd lived through. The answer came without warning a few days later. They were sitting on the porch, watching lightning dance along the far ridge. Kelly cooed in Clara's arms, her tiny hands reaching up to catch the rain that hadn't come yet. Ethan cleared his throat. "My wife's name was Annabelle." Clara turned her head. He passed birthing Kelly, bled too fast, too much. He looked down at his boots. Didn't even get to hold her. Clara's voice was soft. "I'm sorry." Ethan gave a slow nod. "I was angry. At God, at myself. Thought, if I'd done one thing different that day, she'd still be here." Silence stretched between them. "She wanted a girl. Always said she'd name her Kelly if we ever had one." Clara rocked gently. "She would have been proud of you." Ethan gave a dry laugh. "You ain't seen me try to change a diaper." "I've seen worse," Clara said, and smiled. The next evening, Clara found herself standing by the fence line as Ethan wrestled a crooked post into place. Rain fell in soft sheets, soaking his shirt, plastering his hair to his brow. He worked without complaint. Clara returned to the house and came back with his coat, holding it out. He looked up, surprised. "You'll catch cold." He took it, nodding. "Thank you." It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. Later that week, Clara was rocking Kelly to sleep when the baby fussed louder than usual. Clara tried humming, but her voice cracked. Tears came, unexpected and sharp. She tried to turn away, hide it, but footsteps approached. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't ask. He just sat beside her. The fire crackled. Kelly settled. Clara wept in silence, not for what she'd lost, but for what she might still deserve. In the dim glow of the hearth, she whispered, "They called me barren, like land after a drought, useless, dry." Ethan didn't move, but something in his posture softened. "You're not," he said, almost too quiet to hear. The next morning began like any other. Ethan out with the horses, Clara in the kitchen with Kelly, humming as she mashed apples into pulp. She turned for just a moment to stir the pot on the stove. Then Kelly screamed, the kind of scream that didn't belong to hunger or sleep. Clara spun around and froze. A rattlesnake, long and dark, had slithered up onto the windowsill and dropped silently into the room. Its tongue flicked as it coiled near the cradle, eyes fixed on Kelly, who now sobbed in terror. Clara didn't think. She grabbed the iron skillet from the stovetop, still hot, and lunged. One strike, then another, then another. The snake writhed and hissed, but Clara didn't stop until it lay still, motionless, its body broken beside the cradle. She dropped the skillet, breath ragged, hands shaking. Kelly reached up for her. Clara scooped her up, pressed the child to her chest, rocked her back and forth, murmuring something, not words, but instinct. Kelly quieted, nestling in as if she'd never been afraid. Ethan burst through the door moments later, rifle in hand. "I heard." His eyes fell on the dead snake, then on Clara, holding his daughter like something sacred. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Clara looked down at Kelly and realized something had shifted. This wasn't just a child she was helping with. This was her girl now. Whether by blood or not, a bond had been sealed. Not by law, but by choice. And for the first time since arriving, Clara no longer felt like she was borrowing someone else's life. She was living her own. Cold Creek was small, but its gossip traveled fast, faster than horses, faster than reason, and far more dangerous. Within 2 weeks of Clara arriving at the Kerrigan Ranch, her name had become a common refrain beneath whiskey breath and behind lace curtains. "They say he bought her at the feed house," one woman whispered in the general store. "And she can't even bear children," another added, shaking her head as she weighed potatoes. "What kind of man wants a barren woman when he's got a baby to raise?" The men were worse. "Must be real lonely out there on that ranch," a ranch hand chuckled to his friends on the saloon steps. "You'd think a man like Kerrigan could do better." They laughed. Ethan didn't come into town often. He had no taste for crowds, especially ones that turned on a dime. But word reached him. It always did. And Clara felt it more than she heard it, in the way people stopped talking when she entered the mercantile, in the side glances and the too sweet smiles. in the rustling shift of conversation just behind her back. She bore it silently for days, carrying Kelly through town with her chin high, trying not to notice the looks. But inside, old wounds opened. The same ones that had bled when her husband's family cast her out. The same voices whispering that she was less of a woman. One night, as she tucked Kelly into her cradle, she sat a moment longer than usual, watching the baby's chest rise and fall, watching her fingers twitch in sleep like dreams were dancing through them. Ethan found her in the dark, unmoving. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. Clara didn't answer at first. Then softly, "I don't belong here, Ethan. Not to them, not to you." He came closer but didn't touch her. "You don't belong to anyone, Clara, but that doesn't mean you don't belong somewhere." The next day, Ethan rode into town. He tied his horse outside the saloon just as the usual suspects lounged in their usual spots, sipping brown liquor and spitting brown lies. "You come to buy another one?" someone joked, raising a glass. Ethan turned slowly. The air shifted. He stepped forward, boots thudding heavy on the wooden steps, stopping just beneath the awning. "She's under my roof," he said, voice steady but sharp. "She watches my child. She cooks my meals. She listens when I speak, and speaks when she damn well pleases." The men fell quiet. "If any of you has something worth saying, say it to me, not behind your back. Otherwise you can keep your teeth shut." A long silence stretched across the porch. Inside the saloon, chairs scraped quietly against the floor. No one wanted to be the one Ethan Kerrigan was looking at when his patience ran dry. One man, older, missing 2 fingers and all his courage, tried to laugh it off. "We meant no harm, Kerrigan. Just teasing." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You want to tease someone? Find another target. Clara's done nothing but show more grace than any man in this town." He waited. No one spoke again. Then he turned and walked away. The wind picked up as he mounted his horse and rode back toward the ranch. That evening Clara stood on the porch, arms wrapped tight around herself. She saw him ride in, dismount, and tie the reins with practiced ease. "You went to town," she said. He nodded. Her voice trembled. "What did they say?" "Not much," Ethan replied. "Not anymore." Clara looked at him then, really looked, and in his stillness she saw something stronger than fists or fury. She saw a man who didn't just defend her name, he claimed it. Not like a possession, but like a promise. No man had ever done that, not even her husband. Her throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." Ethan shrugged. "Don't say anything." But she stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He looked down at her, eyes steady. "You're not alone here, Clara. Not anymore." In the silence that followed, something shifted between them, not spoken, not touched, but understood, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt what it was to be truly protected. The wind howled long before the rain came, bending trees like prayers toward the ground. Thunder cracked over the plains, loud enough to rattle dishes in the cupboard. The sky turned black by afternoon, and by dusk, the storm had found its rage. Lightning lit the hills, revealing the outline of broken fences and panicked cattle. Ethan was already in the barn when Clara heard the first snap of a splintered beam. She rushed out without a coat, skirts clinging to her legs, rain stinging her face like needles. In the distance, she could see Ethan struggling to pull a steer from a collapsed section of the fence, mud up to his knees. "Esperade?" she called through the storm. He didn't look up. He was too focused, muscles straining as he tried to coax the animal free without spooking it worse. Another bolt of lightning cracked nearby, and the cattle shrieked. Clara didn't hesitate. She waded through muck and wind and joined him, grabbing a rope, anchoring the gate. Together, they moved as one, no plan, just instinct. Survival. By the time the herd was calm and the worst of the damage patched, they were soaked through and shivering. Ethan limped slightly, a gash on his thigh, but refused help. They returned to the house in silence, dripping and numb. Clara lit the fire with shaking hands. Ethan sat heavily beside it, boots left at the door, steam rising from his clothes. Kelly, somehow still asleep in the back room, was the only thing untouched by the storm. Clara brought Ethan a dry towel and dropped onto the floor beside him, too tired to care about propriety. Her hands were scraped, her hair stuck to her cheek, and her bones ached with a kind of weariness that ran deeper than the body. For a long time neither of them spoke. Only the crackle of the fire filled the room. Then Ethan exhaled slowly. "I thought I'd lost one of them tonight. Big one, red steer. Got pinned under the fence." He looked down. "All I could think was, Kelly, if something happened to me out there." His voice broke in a way Clara had never heard before. Raw, quiet. "She's all I've got." Clara watched the flames dance in the hearth, then said, barely audible, "I used to think being barren meant I had nothing to give. Like I was empty. Cursed." Ethan didn't turn away. "But Kelly doesn't care about that," she whispered. "And neither do you. Do you?" He shook his head slowly. "Not one damn bit." For a while they sat like that, so close their shoulders almost touched, but still careful, still guarded by scars not easily spoken. Then Ethan reached over and laid his hand gently on hers. No pressure, no promise, just presence. Clara looked down at their joined hands. His rough from ranch work, hers cracked from cold water and washboards. They didn't fit perfectly, but they didn't have to. His thumb brushed hers, once. She didn't pull away. She leaned her head back against the wall, closed her eyes, and let the warmth of the fire and his touch settle the tremble in her chest. Neither of them said, "I need you," but both felt it. And for the first time, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like truth. The stillness of dawn was broken by the distant crack of hooves. Too many to be cattle. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard it. Not thunder, not weather. Riders. Ethan was already saddled up before she reached the door. "Stay inside," he said, eyes locked on the horizon. "Take Kelly. Barricade the back door." "What is it?" "Rustlers. 3, maybe 4. They've been working ranches north of here. Looks like it's our turn." Clara's breath caught. She grabbed Kelly from her cradle, wrapped the baby tight in a wool shawl, and rushed to the cellar steps. She paused just long enough to retrieve the rifle from above the hearth. Ethan's older one, heavier than she remembered, but loaded. She could barely steady her hands. Outside, gunfire cracked. The ground trembled beneath the pounding of hooves. Clara held Kelly close in the cellar, heart pounding louder than the storm had days before. A scream. "No, Ethan." She set Kelly down gently in a basket of laundry, kissed her forehead, then climbed out of the cellar with the rifle clenched tight in her hands. The sight on the front lawn stopped her breath. Ethan had taken cover behind the water trough, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. One of the rustlers had circled around and now stood with his gun drawn, preparing to fire. Clara didn't think. She raised the rifle, stepped onto the porch, and shouted, "Hey!" The man turned just as Clara fired a shot into the dirt at his feet. He jumped back, startled, losing his aim. Ethan lunged from behind the trough, tackled him, and wrestled the gun free. Another rider saw the commotion and took off toward the gate. Within moments, the fight was over. 2 men tied up, one fled, one wounded, groaning by the fence. Ethan stood, breathing heavy, blood dripping from his brow, and turned toward the porch. Clara still held the rifle, arms trembling. "I didn't mean to," she began, but he was already moving toward her. "You did exactly what you had to," he said. "You saved me." The wind picked up, scattering dust across the yard. Word of the attack spread quickly through Cold Creek. By the next afternoon, folks from town arrived to see the aftermath. The sheriff, late as always, took the prisoners into custody. But the real story, what stuck in people's mouths like splinters, was Clara. "Sir, she shot at a man? Protected the ranch?" Carrigan's girl didn't even cry, they say. Just watched her mama save the day. Mama. The word found its way around the saloon, through the general store, even to the preacher's steps. The same townsfolk who once whispered Clara was useless now said her spine was steel. But Clara didn't care about their talk anymore. That night, as she held Kelly and rocked slowly by the fire, Ethan sat beside her with a stitched brow and silent admiration. "You didn't just save me," he said at last. "You saved all of this?" Clara looked around, the walls, the cradle, the man beside her, and she realized he was right. This wasn't just his land anymore. It was theirs. 3 days after the gunfire faded, a letter arrived by stagecoach, its envelope stiff and foreign, in Clara's hands. She opened it slowly on the porch, eyes scanning the elegant cursive of a woman she'd once worked with in Fort Worth, a distant cousin to her late husband's family. The message was clear. "We heard of your situation. We could use help in the house. Room and board, fair pay, quiet company, a fresh start." It was polite, kind even, and it offered her something Clara hadn't felt since her wedding day: social legitimacy. A way out of the whispers, a place to be seen as useful, without the baggage of Cold Creek's past or the strange truths of her present. That evening she stood by the fireplace, letter folded in her apron, words weighing heavy on her tongue. "I got a job offer," she said finally. Ethan looked up from oiling the hinges on Kelly's cradle. He didn't speak, just waited. "In Fort Worth, they want a housemaid. Nothing special, but it's a clean slate." Across the room, Kelly sat on the rug with her wooden toy, babbling to herself. She looked up when Clara said Fort Worth, her brows furrowing in confusion. Clara knelt down. "Just for a while, sweetheart, maybe. I don't know yet." Kelly crawled over and clung to Clara's skirt, soft whimpers rising. "It's all right," Clara whispered, stroking her hair. "You're all right." But Kelly wouldn't let go. Ethan stood. "You don't owe us anything," he said gently. "Not me, not her. You deserve happiness, Clara. Wherever that may be." She looked at him. His shirt sleeves were rolled, hands still stained with oil and soil. Those hands had saved her more than once now, sometimes without even touching her. He didn't plead. He didn't beg. He only waited. At night, Clara lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch. The creak of old wood, the wind pushing against the window pane, the soft breath of a child asleep in the next room. She stared at the ceiling, the letter resting on her chest like a stone. Fort Worth was clean. Say, expected. But as her eyes fluttered shut, all she could see was Kelly's little hands reaching for her. All she could feel was the quiet weight of Ethan's presence at her side, every time the world grew too loud. Morning came with a soft light creeping through the cracks in the shutters. Clara folded the letter again, but this time she slid it into the fire. It curled and blackened, the ink vanishing before the flames. She turned just as Ethan walked in, coffee mug in hand, surprised by the scent of burning paper. "You made your choice," he said softly. Clara nodded. "I'm not leaving." Ethan held her gaze for a long, still moment. Then, finally, he smiled. Not with triumph, but with something much quieter. Relief. A year passed like the turning of a season, quiet, steady, full of unnoticed miracles. The Kerrigan ranch breathed with new life. Fences stood strong, the barn wore a fresh coat of red, the pasture swelled with healthy cattle, and the vegetable garden behind the house, once half forgotten, now bloomed in rows under Clara's steady hand. Inside, the air smelled of bread and laughter. Clara moved through the house with quiet purpose, her voice soft as she hummed lullabies to a now toddling Kelly, who followed close behind with a wobble in her step and a ribbon always coming loose in her hair. "Mama," Kelly would cry when she wanted to be held. And Clara never hesitated. Not once. In town, the whispers had changed. The same women who once judged now watched Clara with different eyes, as she haggled with the butcher, held Kelly on her hip, or stood beside Ethan at the feed store with her chin up and her apron dusted in flour. "That one's got grit," folks said. "Kerrigan's lucky." No one asked any more about the day she was bought. They knew better now. She hadn't been bought. She had been chosen, and she had stayed. The wedding never happened, not in the church, not under the eye of any preacher. There were no white dresses or flowers, no rings exchanged before a crowd. What they had was quieter, stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast golden light across the front porch, Ethan brought out a pot of stew and 3 bowls. Clara followed with cornbread and a jar of pickled carrots. Kelly ran between their legs, giggling, her hair wild from the wind. They sat down together at the table Ethan had built with his own hands. 3 wooden chairs, one still, too tall for the smallest among them. "Sit up now," Clara said, helping Kelly into her seat. The child beamed, cheeks round and sticky with honey. Ethan watched them both, spoon in hand, and his heart felt like it could break from the fullness of it all. Clara caught his gaze. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, rough, warm, familiar. No words were needed. When dinner ended and the dishes were done, Clara stepped onto the porch, Kelly in her arms. The child yawned, heavy-lidded, curls clinging to Clara's shoulder. "Ah, good." Ethan came behind them, standing close. The wind had stilled. The sky was painted in fire and rose, the sun dragging its heels as if it, too, didn't want to leave. Clara looked out at the land. Not just his land anymore. Their land. Their story. Kelly shifted in her arms, sighing into sleep. Ethan reached out, placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. She leaned into it without thinking, and there they stood. 3 figures against the edge of the world, wrapped in silence and belonging. The frontier hadn't tamed itself. The world still judged. But here, in this place of wind and cattle, of firelight and storms, they had built something no one could take. Clara had not given birth to Kelly, but she had raised her, loved her, fought for her. And in every real way that made her mother. She had not asked for Ethan's love, but she had earned it, and he had earned hers. Not with grand declarations, but with steadiness, with quiet honor, with the simple, profound act of staying. As the last light vanished and the stars broke open overhead, Clara pressed a kiss to Kelly's forehead, then looked at the man beside her. The 2 of them had become close, over the descent, over the night, over the days, over weeks, and she smiled. Because love, real love, was not in blood or law. It was in choosing each other. Again and again, even when the world said you shouldn't. Out here in the Wild West, love didn't always come in wedding dresses or ride in on white horses. Sometimes it arrived in a storm.